Hello, world. This is Carlos. Uh, I'm here to try something new. Not so new. This is another attempt of several at this point, but with a new spin, a new twist. Um, I am trying to develop the habit of recording my thoughts on a more regular basis. I have a lot to say about many things, and I've been wanting to share some of these thoughts and ideas that I have. Um, but I have not made a habit of this. And so what tends to happen is that this is never a priority and it just never gets done. And so today is the uh, first Thursday of January 2024, January 4th. And I'm going to try to do this, and I'm very serious about trying to do this every week. Hopefully every Thursday, but if not, at least every week. There's so many things I have to say, I've been meaning to say, and just want to say. And I'm hoping that, first and foremost, this is for me. So I'm hoping that I feel better just by sharing my thoughts, putting them out into the world. Um, However, another hope of mine is that what I have to say resonates with someone or some people, perhaps many people. Um, I think that by sharing my experience, my thoughts, that the possibility for connections to be forged and made and new relationships and alliances to be built can grow, or can exist, I should say, and grow. So yeah, I think I I mean I have a few bullet points down of things that I'd like to discuss. Um, but this is gonna be pretty rambly. This is gonna be pretty like all over the place, and I'm curious to see what comes of it. If anyone out there ends up finding what I have to say meaningful or impactful, or inspiring. Um, so I'm gonna go ahead and dive in to some of this. So I think part of the reason I'm doing this is because I feel like I need a place to live. And what I mean by that is the circumstances of my life up until this point have made it so that I don't have what some would describe as a career or a vocation that matches my most central core beliefs. Now, this is a privilege that is not afforded to many, um, and so I'm not alone in this by any means. But just speaking from my point of view here on Earth, I'm 32, going on 33. I recently was blessed with the birth of my first son. I married my wonderful wife last year, and I'm getting older. I'm going to turn 33 in a few weeks, and some of the ambitions and hopes and dreams that I once had are starting to look a little bit more distant, look a little bit more not as realistic for me. And I think that because of that, I feel like I need a place to allow the things that inspire the hopes and those hopes and dreams to exist, to give them some air, some breathing room. Since um, you know, um, and I'm gonna get into specifics in just a second on what that is. Um, but I think that for me, this is a space to allow those things to be put to the light. What do I actually want and think about and care about? And so I'm going to try to lay out some of the obstacles, like some of the reasons why I think I've ended up in this situation, some of the challenges that I've had. Um, and I think, again, once I get into some of the specifics, some of this might resonate with anyone who might be listening. But I think I'll start by saying that I'm going to describe what my dreams or hopes and ambitions are. I deeply care about politics in particular. I think that it is the means in which many of the gains which benefit most people in our society and all around the world, but I'll use the United States as my focal point, since that's the country that I live in. Many of the gains and the things that we have that affect our quality of life, um, and how we live our lives are fundamentally rooted in the state, in how our government uses the law and all of its, you know, organizations that are tied to it as a means to control our lives. And in theory, we are in control of our government because we have a representative democracy. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy around that now, that people can say, well, are we really representative, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the influence of government, the state, politics, that whole domain, the place where the laws are made and enforced, um, really creates the structure of how our lives are lived. And our lives could be pretty radically, fundamentally different. If we had a different system, it could be much better. It could also be much worse. The I think a good place to gain any understanding of this is through a reading of history. There have been many civilizations, many empires, many small, gatherings of people, tribes that could, wouldn't fit the description of what we might describe as a civilization. Most of human history, as far as we understand, or I guess not technically history, but before written history, we were hunter gatherers. Most humans existed as hunter gathering societies. And then once with the dawn of agriculture and we started having civilizations kind of form, that's when we created all these different systems of how to organize the world and our lives within it. And in that process, there's been a lot of suffering, a lot of oppression, a lot of injustice, unfairness, concepts which might have even been somewhat foreign for many of the early people who experienced these wrongs. But the way we organize ourselves, each other in our life through the state or whatever apparatus that serves the same purpose has an enormous influence on everything. And so to make things a little bit practical, or just realistic, like how much you pay for your taxes, what your taxes go to, funding public education. Most of us, I'm sure, in the United States went to either public school for sure, or private school, but definitely public school. The standards for the schools we went to, the fact that we have drinking water, that's all of us can, that we have water systems, municipal, we have toilets and sewer systems, and we have electricity, and we have internet and cable companies that they're private, but they are highly regulated. The fact that you have a job and that you pay taxes and you have, employers with laws that they're supposed to follow. The fact that um, we have, you know, I mean, I could go on, but like the government is always there and it's largely in the background of many things. And some find that to be ideal. But it's a huge thing. And so my interest has been, because it's so fundamental in terms of arranging our society, I've always been very interested in government specifically because of that fact, because it has such an outsized role over, I don't want to say everything else. That's definitely, there are other, like, you can say philosophy or religion or other things, but, and closely tied to government, I would put it under the same umbrella of the things that I'm talking about, is the economy. Now, the economy is technically run by the private sector, meaning business people or individuals trying to buy and sell goods in a market. Um, but that's also very heavily regulated and defined more or less by the property law. The laws that say, hey, if you exchange money for something and someone gives it to you, it becomes yours and you own it, and it's no one else can touch it. And that's just one of many examples of how the law, the government, etc., defines our life. And so the economy, some people might see it as its own thing, but it's not. It's very clearly defined by the laws and regulations. Think of the fact that you work 5 days a week, and that it's like by law that we have the 5-day work week. So I could go on trying to make a compelling case for the influence of government because I'm trying to define it for you, the listener, uh, so that it's obvious to you that it has an enormous influence in your life. Like the fact that if I go break a law and I try to kill somebody, and there's a legal system that makes it so I can't do that, or if that I do that I go to jail, and I'm and that's so that people don't do certain bad things to each other out of, at the very least, fear of consequence, which actually, I would argue has at least some sway to keep people from doing bad things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, what I'm trying to say is that the government has the laws, the state have an enormous impact, and in theory, this country that we live in was founded on us being participants in that system. Now, there's a whole array of discussions as to like who was originally envisioned to be an active participant in this representative democracy, which was like the white property owning male versus because who can vote, etc. Um, Obviously, we've moved far away from that which is great. And there are some people who want to potentially return to some kind of more restrictive voting rights, that sort of thing. But the point is, all of us, in theory, can and do affect the system. Like ultimately, Joe Biden is the president of the United States because we elected him. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois because we elected him. Brandon Johnson is the mayor of Chicago because we elected him. So we choose these people who then have power to make important decisions about everything, almost everything in our lives in some way or another. And so I think the government's really important, and I want to highlight that for people who maybe don't see it, because again, it tends to kind of retreat into the background in the same way that our economic system, which is called capitalism, is kind of just taken as a matter of fact, as it's just like, oh, it just is there and it's always been there. And neither of these things have always been this way. And in fact, these things change quite a bit and have changed quite a bit in a matter of years, definitely decades, but even years. And so because of that, I was interested in politics. I majored in politics in my undergraduate. And I was very passionate about, I thought, getting involved in government in some capacity was the way to go. And so naturally, I was inclined to want to work in government. But then, life took a series of twists and turns, and I got kind of put away from that. And I might, if there's time, I might address some of those twists and turns. If not, I'll save it for a future episode. Um, but the thing I care about is like, okay, this thing that we all do, that we all participate in, it has a huge influence. And so it's also been a site for, I would say it's a site for many of the things that we struggle with as people. Many of the things that cause us pain is the fault of the government, of the state, or the economy at the very least, which again, I think is subservient and defined by our government. And many of the things that we enjoy are also the result of the government, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I think it's so central and so important why I personally care so much about it. However, when it comes to working in government, it's not, first of all, it's an enormous thing. So it's not particularly obvious how one could influence things other than by running for elected office oneself. And I've definitely considered that, but there's a lot of issues with, running for elected office, what one can accomplish, that sort of thing. And where I personally, what the issues I have with it are, and why I haven't made some of these types of decisions myself. So I'm going to try to lay out now what some of those issues are. Um, so I think one of them is, so this is kind of me talking about why I personally don't just run for office. But I think in doing so, again, it'll maybe illustrate some things that others can relate to. Um, the first of which is that the just very practical limitations of money. It's an expensive process in this country. Money is a pretty hard limiting factor. It's one of the reasons why, especially at the federal level, but this is also true at the state level, most most people in Congress are wealthy, very wealthy, very far and above. There's like a ton of millionaires, and plus, I don't know if there's any billionaires, but there's definitely a ton of millionaires. Many of the people are far beyond the median. So there's very few people who are considered middle income or below in Congress, as far as I know. And once they get the job, too, you also have a salary of six-figure salary of I forget exactly how much, but so that already puts you above everybody in of itself. But just to get to that place, it takes a ton of money and resources to do that, and so that sets up a huge barrier for anyone who wants to, you know, pursue that path. The second thing is what you can actually accomplish as an individual in Congress or at the state level or the city level is it's not nothing. It's I don't want to diminish that. There's definitely a lot that can be done, but the system itself is so flawed right now. It's so entrenched in its own, let's call them contradictions and all its own like design flaws, that it's difficult for anyone to break really impact something without a very large organized movement behind them. And when I say movement, I don't just mean like the grassroots people on the streets, though that is a huge part of it, but I also mean like organizations and constituencies that are very I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but are very like well organized and well resourced and ready to kind of pass a particular agenda. So I think that there's a lot of just practical limitations for anyone who's interested in government from getting elected to any place where that could materialize. Now, I'm not saying it can't, and there's many people who do, and they are quite successful and they accomplish a bunch of great things. But I'm speaking from my point of view, and so what I'm saying as some of the justifications for not choosing some of the paths that have been laid out before me. That's what I'm here to explain, more or less. And so, a second thing is, the government's really dominated by its political parties. Now, political parties are these massive institutions. They're private. They're not part of the government. But both major political parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, um, they pretty much own the government at all levels. There are exceptions. There are definitely independents. Shout outs to Bernie Sanders. Shout outs to Kshama Sawant and many others who managed to break through, who are not capital D, capital R Republicans. And again, at the lower levels, at the local level, municipal, that tends to be easier than at the highest levels of government. But they dominated, and so there's two parties, and because of the scope of positions and issues that these parties have, they're set up kind of diametrically opposed in this sort of chess match where it's kind of a winner take all, a zero sum game that they've been playing for a while now. And to me, if I was to summarize the state of government as to where I see things in the United States, and again, I can't speak for other countries, but I imagine other democracies might have similar issues. But in the United States, it's that we're approaching the end game of this chess match. We're getting to a place where there is very little movement, there's very little change, there's very little progress because we've kind of exhausted a lot of the things that we've exhausted a lot of the potential maneuvers because the other side has outplayed. Both sides are playing their absolute best for control and for power. And so they use the levers of government to sort of create obstacles for any kind, so that the other side can then not take advantage of that obstacle. And so we're kind of stuck. And so the parties themselves, they're both deeply flawed. I'm just gonna go through some of the flaws that I see in these parties. So, Democrats, but I'm pretty left leaning personally, though I take issues with political labels that I'll maybe address at a future date. But I'm pretty left leaning. But the Democrats, they're awful. So I that would be the if I was to, and I tend to vote Democrat when I vote in elections. Um, and so if I was to vote, I would vote, or I do vote. So I tend to vote Democrat, um, and I'm much more closely aligned with them than I am the Republicans. But I'm not. That's not to say that I'm very aligned with them at all. And some of the failures, even if I agree ideologically with the Democratic Party on certain issues, some of the failures that they have are structural problems. And so, um, the biggest structural problem that all politics has right now is money in politics. It's the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, to get elected, it requires an enormous amount of resource that you have to fundraise yourself, usually through, you know, institutional, organizational donors. And if you're popular enough, then also individual donations. But it's tough. It's tough to get that kind of money. And so the parties themselves are a huge source of cash if you run Democrat or Republican. Um, but the fact that lobbying is such a big problem that you have, all of these, you know, uh, like corporations and institutions, moneyed interests, let's call them, who have an enormous way of influencing the government because they can fund candidates that will do their bidding, and so if you need money to run, and these companies have interests that they want the government either to stay out of their way or they want them to do specific things in their favor, then the way to do that is to find people who either already agree with you or are eager to or are willing to agree with you to get them elected and say, hey, you just run this can run on these issues or run in this way that and advocate for these policies once you're in government and legislate in this way, and we'll fund your campaign. And so that's true of both parties. So it's true of both the Democrats and the Republicans. And so the Democrats, I agree with them on many issues. I would say, but I also disagree with them on some issues. And that presents another problem, which is that the totalizing, am I saying that right? Totalizing nature of our political agendas right now is that you basically, and this is something I've touched on before, you have two menus, and each menu is giant, but you only get to pick one menu. So you're either on menu A or menu B, and menu A has 150 things that you have to eat. And menu B has 150 things you have to eat. And so you might say, well, what if I don't want to eat all those things? Or what if I only want to eat from one menu or the other? Well, to run as a Democrat or as a Republican, you have pressure from in the party to take a position on every single issue that the party itself has a position on, because the parties have their own platforms, and so you average listener might know some of these things like Democrats in principle are pro-life, or sorry, pro-choice. Republicans are pro-life. It's kind of gun control. Democrats tend to be pro-gun control. Republicans against it. Yada yada. So, but there's so many issues, uh, and there's so many positions, and so the constellations of views are kind of rigid and kind of preset. And so you come in as Team Democrat, Team Republican, and they're like, "Hey, welcome to the. Glad you made it. We funded your campaign, and our money, these Democratic Republican organizations, comes from these institutional donors and these industries. They're backed by different industries. Sometimes the same industries, but many times like they have their own pet industries. And now that you're here are the things that we're going to pass, and then you're just there. You're kind of just another body in on the office, and your goal is to advance the ball for your team. So you're just another player on that team, And so, for someone like me who likes to think for himself, my views are, like I said, they definitely trend and lean towards one side over the other, but they're what some might describe as heterodox. And I also just don't operate in that type of way where um, I, I kind of like to think of my own answers to my own idea or my own positions rather than say, oh, because I'm on this team, therefore I think this, and this on this issue. And I think that this is probably true to some extent for most people. Most people don't just like, well, I'm not sure actually. Maybe a lot of people just think, well, because I'm this, that means here's what I believe on all these things. But I'll speak for myself and say that I'm not like that. I like to think for myself, and that could be a problem because if someone like me, for example, so I've been kind of vague about some of the things, right? But let's get a little bit more specific. So let's take the issue of I think I said this last time, but let's take the issue of abortion. Um, so abortion, I have nuanced views, as does much of the American public. But if you are an elected Democrat, you have to be pretty staunchly pro-choice, especially in a liberal city like Chicago. Now, to say Chicago is a liberal city is a bit of a misnomer. It's like, yeah, it's liberal relative to other cities when you aggregate everyone, but there are conservatives who live here. There's Trump voters who live here. There's in a lot of apolitical people who don't care either way. There's people who have a weird mix of their own views. So it's to say something a city is liberal is a very big, broad generalization of millions of people. Um, but I have a feeling that because the issue of abortion is so central in the Democratic Party's imagination or just ideological framework, anyone who's is not entirely just extremely pro-choice um, is considered not a Democrat. They're just said, or just not someone who could run for office. And so, on that issue alone, the fact that I'm not extremely pro-choice is, I would say, almost categorically takes me out of the equation. It's like by definition, I can't really be a Democrat, an elected Democrat. There's plenty of voters who vote Democrat who might have similar views to me. And just to be specific, like I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself to be staunchly pro-life. I'd say I have a view that it's I think in the first months of a pregnancy, because the being that is being created is not a fully formed human, is in fact not very far from that. It's much closer to being a clump of cells or a organism, but like something that you can compare to like a lizard, basically, just with like the human genome in terms of its cognitive and capacities and otherwise. I think that it should be a decision that a woman should be able to choose without question in the first trimester. But as time goes on, I think the equation gets more complicated because yes, it is a woman's body, but the being that is living inside there is half of the father's. First of all, but even if you don't, even putting that aside, it's a human being. It's a living being, albeit not a fully formed one, and so it's more complicated. And so I don't know if it should just be that you should be able to terminate a pregnancy any time at 7 months, 8 months. Now I understand people always have their talking points of like, well, the vast majority of pregnancies are terminated early on. I agree. I'm totally on board with. That's why I'm saying that I don't think it should be restricted at certainly in the first trimester. I don't think it should be restricted though. Beyond that, I think some restrictions may begin to apply. And to be honest, if I understand correctly, that was what Roe v. Wade legislated was that, or not, it's a court ruling, but whatever. It effectively makes the law of the land that the states would not be allowed to really mess with that first trimester. But in any case, that's my position. But the fact that I'm not staunchly, just vociferously focused on that, and the fact that I wouldn't be, if someone asked me, I wouldn't state my honest position, because that's the other thing is like, I think a lot of people are strategic, which is a word that in this context I don't like, in the sense that they might have their real positions. You know, Hillary Clinton famously said, "I have my public positions and I have my private positions," which I think is an embodiment of the type of politics that she represents, which is completely antithetical to my worldview, which is all about honesty and sincerity and being truthful at all times. And so, because of that, I would not take the opportunity when confronted with, if someone was like, what's your stance on this? Like, I wouldn't lie. At most, I would say I'm not interested in sharing it with you because I don't want to, because you're trying to get me, or you're trying to like harm me, and this is not, especially if it wasn't something that was like a central uh, focus of mine or something that I was actively working on. It was just like, hey, like, do you think, I don't know, like Hitler was a bad guy? And the obvious answer is yes, but like just like some ancillary thing that like has nothing to do with what I'm actively working on a day-to-day basis. So, anyways, so that's one issue. There's others, but I just pointed out basically an issue that at least where I live currently in Chicago, if I ran and someone were to ask me what my position were on the issue of abortion, and I try to lay out a nuanced view, which I'm sure that to me that was a very brief summary of my viewpoint, but because our attention spans are so bad, um, I'm sure to many of you that's what I just said was like very long and comprehensive, but I could honestly go on just on that issue alone to lay out all of my views, and perhaps I'll do that at a future date. Um, but that I think would, for me personally, would just be like, nope, sorry, you have no chance in politics with that. And again, it that's not the only issue. That is one of the issues where I deviate from the Democratic Party, which overlaps to some extent with the liberal label. So that's why I personally have not gotten involved. But the problem, I suspect that, there's a lot of people out there who might believe in some of the things that I believe in, like who might share my constellation of views. And that's part of the reason why I'm interested in doing this, is that I'm trying to tease that out. I have suspicions. Because I talk to people, and being someone who's very interested in politics specifically, though that is not my only area of interest, and I will talk about things that extend beyond that, I'm sure, as I'm doing this recording myself practice. Um, I I get the sense that there's people out there who agree with what I have to say, um, more so than polls would suggest. And I want to kind of go back to the structural problems and explain some of the solutions, and or some of the solutions that I have envisioned. But anyways, the last thing I could say is like one could work as a government bureaucrat, but I don't think that that would be specifically scratching the itch for advocacy and change that I would do. Like, I don't think that, I'm not saying I couldn't happen or that I wouldn't jump on that opportunity if it became available for me. Um, but number one, I have ADHD, which has proven to be a serious challenge in white collar environments. I struggle very much with deadlines, and in many white collar environments, deadlines are non negotiable. So that kind of puts another kind of roadblock in my interest, even if I were as interested in just the more administrative, bureaucratic side of government. Um, but yeah, I just don't see like enormous big changes happening there. And who's to say that this will lead to it either? But I just again feel the need to say things and hope that maybe some people find this interesting, and maybe it could lead to potential uh, opportunities for organization or movement or that sort of thing. But going back to the structural problems, so like you have these, the Republican Party is completely bought and owned by corporations, and some of them are just flagrantly in favor of that. They're like, oh, this is great, this is how it should work. It's I don't know, they'd say it's freedom of speech or the free market or something. It's insane to me because you're literally like having the regulators, for example, who are supposed to say, hey, you can't pollute land. You can't dig for oil here because it'll pollute land, um, where my constituents, who I represent, live on. And then an oil company is like, that's nice, and they'll come in and just literally give you cash in the form of campaign contributions. And then you're like, hey, you know what? I changed my mind. And so you run, and then they use the most. And like, if you had an opponent who was taking that principled stance to protect the citizens in their land, uh, we have such sophisticated like smear merchants and communicators and brand brand marketing. I don't even know what to call it. That because that's money, because money is what people used to live, and a lot of people are willing to do some pretty morally questionable things to get ahead in life. They'll figure it out, and they'll draw on the airwaves, and so that's the problem, is that it's such a central thing. And so uh, a solution that kind of emerged that I thought was really interesting, that really gave me a lot of hope, and this is all kind of tied to the Bernie Sanders wave of things, was that there was a group called the Justice Democrats, founded by Kyle Kalinske, Cenk Uygur, and some of the Bernie Sanders campaign people. Um, they were like, hey, let's do a political party, or let's do a group that is going to do a takeover of the Democratic Party in the same way that the um, Tea Party did through the Freedom Caucus of the Republican Party. It was an adversarial, hostile takeover because they thought the leadership was not representing the voting base of the party. And so they came in and said, hey, let's do the same thing with the Democrats. And the reason they were particularly interesting is because I don't know if the Freedom Caucus had this. I'm almost certain they did not. But they said they could not take corporate PAC money. They could not take uh, money from corporate donors, the Justice Democrats. Now, I would go further and say that you should receive no institutional money, because I think even ostensibly good institutions like unions should not be able to donate. I think it should. I think we should have a system of public financing, but that solution is so far and so big that, like, to get to a place where we have the means to effectuate that is pretty hard. Not saying it's impossible. Would love to see more action and movement on that, but there is not like a grassroots upswell of that I see um, out there. It's something I'd like to potentially research and getting involved with myself. But so, anyways, these Justice Democrats, which includes AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, in the first wave, and then a bunch of others like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman and others in the second wave, they did not take corporate PAC money, and they had a list of positions that I largely agreed with. Some of them, not all of them. But it was exciting. It was exciting, and I still think that is the way forward, is for more candidates to run in. I think there should be third party activity as well. I think it's a both. It's a multi-pronged strategy to fix our government. So one of them is for candidates to run as Democrats or Republicans, even. It doesn't matter to me. Who do not take any kind of uh, money other than small dollar donors for as long as we have this current system, until we have a public financing of elections system. It's a much harder thing to do, right? To get individuals to give money for political candidates. But it was exciting. And so, however, I think so it was wildly successful, given the obstacles. I was extremely impressed with what happened, and I had a lot of hope. I loved AOC. I thought she was going to be the next Bernie Sanders, but then I saw, slowly but surely, a lack of organization, a lack of vision. It was like, once they were so keen on just getting there, that once they got there, they didn't really have a plan. And that became very obvious in how they have operated since then. Because I think what would have been effective was for them to operate as a block, as almost like a political party within a political party, where they meet and have their own meetings and discussions on a regular basis on, this is the way we're going to vote. Because, again, like I said earlier, like, doing things as individuals is like extremely difficult, especially in this two-party duopoly. And so they could have done something where they could have gotten concessions and really made a difference because the margins are so thin that you can see it with the likes of some of the Freedom Caucus people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm talking all federal stuff. A lot of this can and does apply to state and local, but um, you see these the fact that they are able to extract concessions and cause a lot of pain for the leadership. By virtue of just being a small group of organized people when we have this very like divided Congress of these two parties, so that you can't, if like 5, 10, 50 people, depending on the situation, elected representatives say, hey, we're not going to vote for this bill, even though we're in the same party, unless you give me that. That's very powerful. And if it only takes a few, you can actually leverage that quite a bit. But what they did is that they all kind of got sucked in. They all became sort of institutionalists, and I think they lacked a coherent plan and vision in terms of how they were going to actually pressure the structure of the Democratic Party um, to execute their plans to use leverage because I don't know if it's because they wanted to have longevity in their career there, but it's the fact that they didn't have unity amongst themselves, saying, hey guys, we're a block, here's how we're going to act, here's exactly the game plan, and if one of us loses an election as a result, like there'll be a plan for that person, like there'll be a future for that person, so that we don't like it's like they're not all threatened by the loss of their career or the loss of a future election if the party turns on them for their um, decision to be so adversarial. Um, So, anyways, I've kind of lost hope in them because number one, they've completely lost touch with their base. I feel like they don't. I know some of them do like town halls and stuff, but I think a true. So to get into a specific proposal of something I'd like to see different is like a true grassroots movement in which constituents are actively involved, and to differing degrees. Right? There's constituents who just like to go to like the occasional town hall. There's many constituents who don't do anything, and I wish people would go more often to their what if their elected representatives do some kind of public hearings. So doing town halls, having constituents be more involved, but then having constituents then have greater degrees of involvement where they have active, so that the representative becomes less of an individual acting on behalf of people and more like a face to an apparatus that involves regular people making decisions, which the person who's the representative then just goes and like executes that formally, but that there's a series of processes of meetings and discussions involving the input of a large group of people. Getting people involved is more or less what I'm trying to say. Um, but it's very top down and it's very like, all right, we're going to do this like town hall, but it's all run by me and my staff, and I'm just going to say some things and take maybe a few questions and move on. And so one thing I plan on doing is trying to go to some of these things because I haven't been going. But I'm just one person, and it's kind of annoying because I can just go rant and rave or whatever, but I'm just like a random guy, But if I was in a position of elected power myself, I would be eager to set up these processes in place where there would be a strategy among of getting my constituents involved, and not everyone has to be involved to the same degree because not everyone can or wants to, but definitely having groups where it's like I'm having ongoing conversations with my own voters on a regular basis every time something happens. It's not just me, hey, I'm telling you what I'm going to do. That's it. It's like I need to show up and you get to tell me exactly what you think on every single thing. So I think they've lost the plot. I think it shows in the fact that a lot of the fundraising numbers went down for the Justice Democrats and similar organizations. I also think that it's difficult again because they do, because they are Democrats, they more or less have full agreement with most of the policies of the Democratic Party. It's like, what's the point of, the theoretical thing is like, at least they're not taking corporate money, which is great. And they're maybe more progressive on certain issues or left-leaning than the Democratic Party. Um, but ultimately, they are still very much aligned with their own party. So it sort of begs the question: it's like, why run it? Why run that? Why does this group exist at all? And I think some of that other than like I think a lot of it. And look, I'm gonna start stepping into some speculation and potential judgment here that I might be wrong on. So I'll say this very softly, as in without confidence. But like, I think so much of them get caught up in the vibes of like what it being millennial and I guess now Gen Z progressive elected figures, and it's so much driven by like social media influence, and it's like a show. It's like a an affect. It's like an appearance. It's like a lifestyle. AOC to me sometimes comes off very much as like a lifestyle brand influencer. You know, like there's like a whole like, oh, this issue happened, I need to now comment on it and post about it in a certain way, and it's all kind of very driven by these communications tools and technology that we all use every day in the form of social media and are ourselves largely influenced by. And so the it's not the sort of grassroots power building that I think needs to happen. And so part of it is that with directly with the constituents, but then also like, you know, creating organizations that are or building on organizations that are more deeply involved in the day-to-day activity of these elected representatives. Because that's the other thing is like a lot of it's like, all right, you say you're gonna act this, these are your positions, and we're gonna run you. And then once you get there, it's kind of like they just let them run wild, and they don't have any means of kind of checking them. And so some of the socialist groups. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole socialist thing right now. I don't have time for that today, but I will eventually. But a lot of socialist groups that I have interacted with or spoken with, like they've you know they've had some good ideas of saying we need to be able to check and control and influence like the party, the socialist parties or party of these elected, they tend to run Democrats, so elected Democrats in office, so that they're not just out there doing their own thing. It's like they're part of this organized movement. Now, it's funny because it kind of contradicts what I was earlier saying about, you know, wanting to be heterodox and a free thinker, and also that many people who run in like the Democratic Party runs that way, where it's just like they're just supposed to kind of whip every representative into shape and tell them to vote a certain way, and they're just bodies effectively filling seats that are with a predetermined way of how they're going to vote, you know. But I think the difference is that these apparatuses that I'm proposing are deeply tied to regular average people, you know. These are people who are largely these are it's an ongoing thing where it's not this one, you come vote for me and that's it. It's about building these movements to get these people involved. But going back to the other issue that I wanted to elaborate a bit further, I think that it's just a big problem that um, you have to accept this menu of positions. And even if you run as a Justice Democrat, for example, or Working Families Party, or whatever the hell it's called, you know, you still have a laundry list of positions. And the thing is like the constellation of people who actually hold these positions, I actually think is pretty small. Like the number of people who are like pro Medicare for all, Green New Deal, $15 minimum wage, pro defund the police, pro Black Lives Matter, pro trans issues, whatever they might be, or pro LGBT, pro like um, you know, COVID mandates, pro like the more you go down that list, the smaller and smaller that sliver gets to be. But these parties in their messaging, these groups, so I'm thinking of like, you know, Working Families Party or like Socialist Alternative or this, even some of the unions now, they all seem to feel this need to take a stance on everything. And I think that's a problem because there's not a coherent, consistent group of people that all believe some things, and some issues are more popular than others. And I think this is a difficult and painful thing that I think needs to happen is that people need to prioritize. And by people, I mean both the voters, but also the elected representatives and in the institutions that get them in office as well. They need to say, we can't run on all these super popular things and also run on these like somewhat less popular and even unpopular things all as part of this complete package, especially if you tend to front and center, because you make yourself vulnerable, first of all, for the opposition to put front and center the least popular things that you have, which is what they do, which is why the right wing, all they talk about is like, you know, liberals turning the kids trans and wanting them to be trans and having hormones and surgeries at 13. And these are pretty like fringe issues that most people either don't have a position on, or it's definitely not in their top thing. But I would argue that many of these progressive and left-leaning groups in socialist groups and whatever are either in favor of this or um, open to it or supportive of. And there are people in these groups who feel the need to put these things front and center, or else they'll accuse you of being some kind of ist or ism, racist, uh, sexist, xenophobe, homophobe, whatever, you know. And we all know those people, and it sucks because it's like you can be literally in the same party, in the same institution, agree on 99%, and just be like, hey, actually, I'd like to slightly disagree here, please, on just this one particular thing. And they're like, no, you're literally as bad as the other guys, which is ridiculous. But we haven't collectively formed a capacity to talk and be assertive against that, and say, hey, no, don't actually accuse me of such awful things because I happen to disagree with you. We can have a disagreement on something that is important to you, and you can say that, but don't go as far as in decrying my character as inherently evil or as bad as the people you tend to oppose. So, you know, this is all to say that like there's too many issues and there's too many positions, and what I would like to see is I would go as far as saying like this isn't even a political party. So here's one of my solutions to these many problems. So the Democrats, the Republicans, like I said, they're pretty awful as a party. I'm not saying the voters. I think all human beings are worthy of love, and I'm sure many people have reasons for believing what they believe, even if I fundamentally disagree. So I'm not making any statements about the value of people, Trump voters, otherwise. But what I'm saying is that party, you know, I mean, let me just get to the point. I think there should be three issues, and I'm thinking federal, but I'm sure this could also apply to state and local, that a consortium, let's call it a network of affiliates, not a political party per se, obviously, not another third party, because I think that there are already third parties and they already serve their function, even though I think it's mostly a lost cause. But I still think it's worth fighting the good fight to fight the duopoly, which is really bad. But a consortium, a group that represents a consortium, an amalgam that says there are 3, maybe 5 issues that we're running on, and these are they're issues that are extremely popular among the American public. They all poll extremely high. And so we're going to run people who are going to be solely focused on advancing these causes, you know. So that's their main goal. That's their purpose, is to run on these issues, and that's it. And those issues would be like, I don't know, for example, like universal health care or raising the minimum wage to, I guess now it'd have to be even more than $15 an hour, maybe $20 an hour. I don't know, because it's been $7.25 for like decades now. But whatever they would be selected, and then every candidate who runs as someone who gets the stamp of approval and potentially the funding from this group, this network, would say, I'm going to put front and center these 5 issues because, number one, I know they'll win. So I know that I can win because I'm running on very popular things. And number 2, I know it's what the people want. You know, it's like, and these are issues that, because the people want them, they will improve the lives of most people significantly. And so I think that's really my my hope, is that through that, and then they would have to resist the temptation to, number one, always respond to the news cycle, because the news cycle always creates new problems, or it's not even creates. Sometimes there are just real problems that the news cycle is responding to. But if you lose focus on those 3 to 5 issues that are the central platform, you can then begin to run into problems, because you can take on positions that are unpopular, that can either stain you as an individual or the movement at large and cost you the election. And so it would say, if someone came up to me and they were like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Is a little old now, but like defund the police or some COVID thing, I'd be like, "Hey, listen, I have positions on all issues, and so do other people who are part of this group. But that's not what I'm running on. I'm running on these five specific issues, and this is what I'm going to focus all my time and energy on. That's what we have agreed as members of this consortium group. Let's call it the American Workers Group or Party or people, whatever. It doesn't matter what you want to call it. This like cohesive, this in the group itself would have to have enough structure and influence, and then a game plan so that the once they're elected, that the people who run in this group are extremely accountable to that group, and also some of these grassroots things that I was talking about, where people are actively opining and contributing. But the central platform is like we have these five tenets. These are the things we're running on. These are the things we need to pass right now. Yesterday, the child tax credit, which expired, it was a COVID thing. It was literally millions of kids out of poverty in the United States. Enormously beneficial for families with children. And then it just because it was a COVID era thing, we just let it expire, and all these people went back into poverty. Absolute insanity. Extremely popular thing. That's something like that. I'm not gonna sit through and figure that out right now for myself or for you, to your listener. But that's the thing that I would do. And so it's hard because right now, for example, like is Israel Palestine something I would run on as one of these five issues? Probably not. And that's hard because right now in my opinion, there's a genocide and ethnic cleansing happening. But it's not to say that these five people would not be able to take their own positions. In fact, I would even argue that they could run as Democrats or Republicans. Whatever is most convenient for the district and whatever reflects their views more. It's just that they would have to focus front and center these five issues, and they would actively collaborate and work with the party apparatus, this consortium group that I'm talking about, to strategically vote on within the Democratic and Republican Party to make sure that these issues are the ones being pushed and that's they're laser focused, because otherwise everyone's being driven by the news cycle and the latest thing that you have to take an issue on, and there's so many things that need to be fixed, and so little things are being fixed, especially by the last two presidents and Congresses. This Congress has been very unproductive as far as I understand. That people have to be able to just we have to be able to start somewhere, and not start small necessarily. We can start big. There are big things that can and should be done, but we have to pick one of them. Even maybe five is like me being optimistic, but even if it was just one issue saying, hey, we are the Medicare for all or the get the money out of politics group, and we know that has massive support, and we're just endorsing candidates left and right, putting money to it, and generating a movement behind just getting this specific thing passed. But all of us, the voters, the representatives, are so driven by the news of the day and then the litany of issues that all of us have positions on. All of us have opinions. All of us have, the right to have opinions, because many of the other issues that I'm talking about that maybe wouldn't fall under these five things still are enormously influential and have the impact of millions, if not billions, of people. That's just the nature of the world we live in this globally interconnected system, and the nature of the United States. But I want to see something done. And I feel like if we were laser focused on a particular set of issues that we already know are extremely popular, put that front and center, and then strategized and worked actively um, to promote this, I think that would be the way to actually begin seeing some change. Um, so this is just the beginning of some of my ideas. I will end by saying that I feel like there's people now with media platforms. Like I'm thinking of the YouTube political commentators that I watch, such as Crystal Ball and Kyle Kalinske and whoever. It doesn't matter who it is, but those two specifically are two of the ones that I watch the most, who have a platform where they could do this. Like they could begin. And I think in the case of Kyle Kalinske, he's probably burnt from what happened with the Justice Democrats. Um, but I think he has a platform. I wish I had that level of attention where I could influence people to begin these machinations, begin these processes, begin these where you can influence a large group of people to start these sorts of things. I know Nina Turner is doing something to support unions, which is great. But I'm saying like there are people right now who are in a much better position than I am, just random Joe Schmo ranting for an hour, you know, to actually make these things come true. Because I do think that we have to be serious, and I think that it's not serious to think that you're gonna run like people. There's a socialist conference here in Chicago that happened, and I ostensibly agree with a lot of socialist points. Again, a conversation I'll save for later, but I don't agree on many, which is a problem. Um, and I remember reading like one of the conclusions that they came to. It's like everything needs to be changed all at once. It's all interconnected, and I'm like, yes, it is all interconnected. But the idea that we're gonna have the ability to just all change on it would assume that all of us agreed on everything, and that's the sad reality that I wish people would grapple with is that we don't. 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. 77 voted for Joe Biden. Many did not vote at all and did not like either of these candidates. The United States is a pluralistic country of such different types of people, of different religions, races, backgrounds, beliefs, interests, you name it, and it's amazing that we've been able to function as is, given the enormous list of differences. But the idea that there's just this large group of people that agree on everything, on like 100 issues, and that we're all just waiting to get activated and get awoken, I just don't see it. I think a better approach is to start with, hey, there's at least, because I know they exist, because I look at the data, I look at the polling, I read about it, I watch these commentators talk about it. There is a pool of issues, at least a handful of which, if you want to be pragmatic and reasonable, where people agree and they're like, yes, I agree on universal health care of a government run program like is done in most developed nations, which, with all their flaws, and I understand that they have their own flaws, are much better than the insane price gouging system that we have now, where tons of people don't have health insurance, and even those that do still end up having to pay a shit ton of money for treatment. So, anyways, this is getting really long. I gotta cut this short because I gotta go. But I hope to whoever's listening, I appreciate you for caring what I have to say. I'll say one more thing. I hope that if this ever does materialize, let me set the intention now. If I ever developed an audience, which was, that's like that would be that seems so like I might as well be saying like I'm gonna be in the NBA. Like that seems so unrealistic. But let's pretend is that this is not meant. I'm not. I don't want to be a commentator. I don't want to be a media person. The first avenue towards power I would seek it. Now, not never at the expense of my values or my beliefs. But what I'm saying is like I think we need to all start going beyond just talking about these things, and we need to start doing things. Whether it's creating these groups, advocating for these strategies, and I'm just doing my part by talking for an hour. But I hope it inspires people out there in the world. Who might be listening, and as well as people who might know me personally, to say that we need to start. I'll start doing a little bit more. And politics is just the thing that seems to make the most sense to me in terms of where the things need to really change, because our society can't continue as it is. So I'll end things there. I really hope that all of your dreams come true, and my own as well. And we'll see where this goes. I'm going to be recording myself a lot more. So peace out, everybody.